Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a number of things I'd like to talk about, but let me say at the heart of my opposition to this particular authorization for use of military force is that I don't believe it really commits us to victory. I don't think, and I don't think I would ever vote for an authorization for use of military force. In other words, put the finest among us at risk of their lives if we, as a Congress, if the Commander-in-Chief isn't fully committed to victory. I mean, an example that has always weighed in my mind was when President Obama announced his surge in Afghanistan, and in the same speech said he was going to withdraw in 2 years. That really provides some comfort to our enemies. And in our testimony, in Senator Kerry's testimony, I asked him the question, does the President really believe that we can defeat ISIS in 3 years? No. Why would we want to put that restriction? Why would we authorize the use when we're not fully committed to victory? I just think that's the wrong thing to do. Another deficiency is we're really not defining what defeat is, which I would argue is you know, what is the end goal? What is the achievable goal we're trying to achieve? As I look through the authorization, about the only goal I see stated in here is to counter the grave threat to regional stability. That's not the same as degrading and ultimately defeating ISIS. I would say that was a deficiency of the 2001 authorization. We authorized the use of military force, but we did leave it pretty open-ended. And I agree with those individuals who certainly have a question as to whether or not that current authorization really is applicable in this situation. Now, the way we handled it in World War II, and I think we should look back to the past history. Again, totally different circumstances, a nation state, but there actually was a stated goal. It was to bring the conflict to a successful termination. Now, it didn't necessarily totally define that, but back then, against nation states, people pretty well understood what that was, unconditional surrender. Now we have a totally different circumstance. So I don't think I have to say too much more other than to thank the chairman for holding this. I think this is a very good discussion. I think it's a necessary discussion. We're not going to bring this to conclusion, but this is a good first step. And as we reopen the discussion, reopen the debate next year, I'm really going to encourage my colleagues here to go, if you're going to have a strategy, there's really a process to going through to developing one. You have to first recognize reality. And sometimes that's not very easy to do. By the way, we had an excellent hearing the other day with Senator Boxer, and the witnesses that the majority called described the reality. Let me just give you a couple of their statements here real quick. The witnesses said that ISIS is gaining strength. They're worse than ever. Bombing's not doing much. We're having very ineffective aid efforts. The military mission is not sufficient. ISIS will be around for the foreseeable future. Now that's painting a pretty ugly reality that we're not really recognizing in this authorization. So if you're going to have a strategy, you have to recognize reality, then you have to set yourself an achievable goal. People need to understand what is the goal. Now again, President Obama has laid it out, degrade and ultimately defeat ISIS, but we haven't really described what defeat looks like. And I would argue that then limiting actions, first of all, not particularly wise. I don't know why you'd ever signal to your enemy what you will or will not do to defeat them, but you're limiting that activity. So again, I would really urge as we continue our discussion in the next Congress, let's understand reality, which is going to require hearings. It's going to require the participation of this administration. Let's understand what the achievable goal is. Let's understand what it's going to take to achieve that goal, and then let's craft the authorization for use of military force specifically to achieve that goal, not tie the hands of the Commander-in-Chief, who's going to be charged with that awesome responsibility of committing the finest among us, putting their lives at risk. Let's make sure the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, has the full authority to achieve the goal that we all agree on. And I think that's the way to proceed into this. But again, I appreciate this hearing, and I appreciate the thoughtful discussion debate.
Well, thank you, Senator Johnson. Before I recognize Senator Johnson.
I think much of this discussion really kind of underscores my primary point is we should spend a lot of time on definition. You know, spend a lot of time defining exactly who the enemy is, as opposed to name one group and associated forces. That's too ill-defined. So if we spend a lot of time defining who the enemy is and then spend a lot of time defining exactly what the objective is, and then be 100% committed to the objective. You know, don't tie anybody's hands. Don't place limitations. Define the objective and be 100% committed to it. If we do that, it'll be a whole lot easier finding the coalition partners that will also be 100% committed to the exact, properly defined objective. And let me just use an example. The first Gulf War. When the first President Bush said this will not stand when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Very clear defined objective, drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And he was able to assemble a phenomenal coalition that by and large paid for the war. Over 200,000 other troops were involved in that coalition. Again, that was because it was a very, very clearly stated objective. And this country, America, was 100% committed to that objective. No limitations. We were going to make sure that Saddam Hussein was driven out of Kuwait. So again, I would just suggest that in our next discussion in the next Congress, we really spend a lot of time in this committee defining exactly who the enemy is that we're going to declare war on or authorize the use of military force against, and then clearly define the objective. Spend a lot of time on that, and then an awful lot of these limitations, a lot of these concerns really just go away. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Any other members?
If I could just briefly, I haven't vigorously debated because I realize we're going to be